There we go. So for me, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some selections, and I'm going to grab this guy. And if I'm thinking about, a head study, I'm thinking about taking this portion. Let's bring that in a little bit more. Okay. So I am going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it here. And then let's do a little transformation on this guy. And get this thing up to a larger size. And I'm not so much going to use the pixels directly. I'm mostly going to use this as a map so I can kind of draw back over the top if I need to, get some line work in there, but use this as sort of a template from as a place to begin, which means I got to get my sort of positioning correct. And because I'm going to draw it again, I will probably end up that's not bad. Because I'm going to draw it again, I'm not too worried about the resolution being stretched and it becoming kind of, the image resolution reducing, although it's pretty decent just from the scan of what I have here. So I'm also going to take a look here at transforming this thing and try, let's flip this thing horizontally and let's see if it looks any different. Ooh, interesting. I don't know if I like that better or not. This is always a good test when you're doing a sketch, is to look at it in mirror view to figure out, like, is there anything different that when you look at the thing in its mirror image, right, flipped, that your brain is no longer making those adjustments that it got used to doing. We see an image and our brain wants to get involved with interpreting it, right? It wants to get in there and say, well, the things you don't understand or don't make 100% clarity to your vision, I'm going to fill in the gaps with what I think it should be. And then it starts to remember that, and it becomes part of your visual memory to compensate for those things you're not seeing. So when you suddenly see that thing in mirror image, then suddenly your brain has to remap it, right? And you notice things that don't look right. So it's interesting. I'm kind of looking at this thing flipped now, and I'm not sure that it has quite the same feeling. But I think just for funsies, I might try to do this reversed just to see what that does, at least in terms of redrawing the image, etc. Okay. All right. So let's start with this. I'll keep the other image open for a while, but I don't want to. So let's call this. Let's do a quick save on this. Hey, Gwyn Rage. Good to have you back. Welcome into the stream. Nice to see you here. Incognito. Okay. I'm going to save this over here. So we'll call this Beastie Head Study. All right. Alrighty, so there we go. Okay, so let's do a little bit of drawing first. And I think what I will do is turn this down a little bit in terms of the opacity and see what I can do to kind of correct this a little bit. I'm going to zoom in. Let's get a little bit bigger. I'm going to grab, see what I got over here. I have a couple of pencils that I like to use from time to time. Let's see what this thing looks like. That's not bad. Go a little smaller maybe. Nope. Larger. Okay. We'll start there. Okay, so I'm just going to draw for a little bit and work on this thing and draw it and kind of fix it as I'm working on it. Going over the top, I'm just going in normal. And I'm working with this, as you can tell, I've got a little bit of this kind of gray. And some of this is kind of working back directly over the top, just to get my bearings kind of straight. Gwyn Rage, how you been? Everything going good? All right. So again, thinking a little bit about little adjustments that I might make. I've got a little bit of a lower jaw here. And of course, like most things, when I'm starting out here, I'm thinking about proportions. I'm not thinking about too much detail, but I'm going to correct for some things that maybe don't make sense. For instance, right here, I'm going to think a little bit about a center line, right? Center line, just to kind of help keep my sense of left to right in position. A little bit of those proportions. And structurally, I kind of have this crown up here, right? Thinking about that head, and then I have this kind of muzzle barrel shape. With a little bit more of this view of this side. So as we can see, there's a little bit of a sort of a rotation of this thing. So if we have the muzzle here, it's not directly down the center. Head sort of on top. But I'm getting a little bit more of a view this way, which means I'm getting a little bit more of the side of that mouth there. This eye is going to wrap a little bit more around the side. Going to see the inside of this ear, but probably more of the back side of that ear. So thinking a little bit more. Okay, so this I'm just going to make a few marks here on my own layer just to keep track of a few of these structures as I go. Now again, this ear, thinking a little bit about things on this side of the head, rotating around, probably curling back. Like in this case, it's actually a little bit wider. So, if I had to do that last one again, and I'm thinking about this, I might bring it in a little bit. Maybe not so far out to the side. And again, the ear kind of maybe connecting out to the side. I like that. See that I'm getting a little bit of that lower lobe flapping out. The top of the ear overlapping, and the back of the ear kind of coming around like that. Curving in and then back like that. right? Moving the eye a little bit around this side. 3/4 view. Again, thinking about those dimensions. Might bring that nose over a little bit more. So this is me kind of correcting now, right? Nice. Eyebrows kind of falling in a line with the ears. Kind of interesting. I didn't really notice that before when I was sketching it, but these eyebrows are almost kind of moving their way in alignment with the ears. Of course, the ear also connecting along the back of the head here. Okay, so this side of the face, okay. So a little bit more on this side of the face. That sort of jaw coming down, right? Watching that center line. A little bit more of the teeth will be here on the side. A little less on that side. Curve, curve. Got to make sure you get all of those curved surfaces, right? Curves, curves. As we get closer to the top, those curves will get a little bit flatter, but the lower you go, the more those curves. All right? So you're thinking about perspective a little bit. Any kind of volume that you can include in there. And these eyes being a little bit sort of elements of feeling almost human. Okay, just checking. Okay, so this was sort of some of that hairy mane. Okay, so I think let's turn off our image here for a second, see how things are looking. Better, not bad. A little bit of corrections. So I'm thinking about these hairs kind of all wisping the same way. The hairs kind of all moving in the same direction implies that there's kind of a wind thing happening. Implying a little bit of movement or motion. So again, like one of the things I'm kind of noticing here in the sketch that I didn't see before was, I've got some of these whiskers here on the side, and I'm thinking about the symmetry of those things now. So again, we'll have some whiskers over here, but that means again on the other side, a little more foreshortened, maybe seeing a little bit less because they're on the far side. More of them over here, less of them over there. I don't know how much of the shoulders I'm really going to include here, but I'm thinking, I'm implying a little bit of those hairs. The other thing is by working larger like this now. I'm getting a chance to include some detail that I didn't include before. I took something smaller, I'm drawing it larger, and you expect to see more detail if you draw it larger. It's not just a straight enlargement of the same thing. A lot of my students sometimes make that mistake in that they will take something small that's line art and they'll just enlarge it. But if you're going to depict it larger, you expect to see more detail. So there's got to be more detail than there was in your initial shot, at least. So I'm thinking about indicating a little bit of the clavicle there. And these hairs are sort of continuing. And then this is sort of the top of the shoulder. Okay, I'm just lightly sketching in. This isn't the final art. This is just a place where I am working on symmetry, proportion, things that I want to correct, or at least be thinking more about as I go into the next stage. So we have sort of pectoralis here, clavicle kind of coming in, which means the clavicle's a little bit here. These shoulders are kind of turned. Maybe I don't turn the shoulder quite so much this time. I don't know. See how things are looking. Maybe I pull the shoulder back. Like it's pretty low here, so I'm wondering if maybe I pull that shoulder back up a little bit. Let's do a layer over the top. I'm going to duplicate this layer. Turn that one off. I'm going to erase some of this here. I'm going to bring that shoulder up, not quite so far. The twisting and the turning looked great in the full body shot, but I'm now thinking about this presenting itself a little bit less turned. So that means maybe the shoulder comes down a little bit more. So I definitely like how we're sort of suggesting the mane is working its way back behind, but it's the shoulder that needs to come up a little bit more. Okay, so the shoulder maybe kind of comes maybe this one comes down a little bit. Drop this shoulder. Okay. I got the pectoralis there, which is lower here. But now I'm thinking about raising that up a little bit. So if that shoulder kind of comes up, pectoralis, maybe it comes up a little higher. All right. So I'm a little higher up here. The pectoralis kind of comes up a little bit higher over here. Maybe this one drops a little lower. This kind of muscly shoulder comes in there. I like that a little bit better. He's not so turned. Okay. Okay. So let's do this. Anything else that needs to happen here? Chest. Kind of rib cage. Arm coming up. Shoulders a little less squared off, but we're still seeing the mane disappear. Down the back. Okay. Okay, here we go. So we're going to go in with a new layer now. Reset the tool. So now I'm going to kind of work back in here following my new lines. Okay. All right. I got some, may have some whiskers here too. I don't think I really did much with the whiskers. Not that there wasn't enough going on there. Got some little wispies there. He's a hairy dude. It's the layers of hair too. The silhouette hairs definitely are having an effect, but we're thinking about the layering of hair and fur, I should say. New position on the ears. So we're going to make this ear kind of lower ear here. So there's definitely some dimension to it. Connecting there. Go up a little bushier with these eyebrows too. Ultimately, what I'm looking for here is something that doesn't feel exactly like the same exact drawing, but maybe a slight different altered drawing. And in the end, it ends up becoming really its own. But we're getting just the feeling that it's not exactly the same, which is why drawing it, redrawing it a couple times will give you that kind of result that you're looking for. So again, we're kind of going for some of this contour here. Kind of scrunching. Okay, now I'm gonna do a little cleaning up here, put some things in some folders so I can turn them off, see where I'm at. Ooh, yeah. Liking that. Tea break. How's everybody doing out there? Okay? All right. Some of those details that we didn't have. I'm going to go with a little bit longer with the sort of beard, goatee-ish kind of. All right, let's do a little save, by the way. Checking again for some of our corrections. Good. All right. Looking good, looking good. Doing okay. Let's keep moving here. Pectoralis kind of coming down there. Moving across to the other side now. So a little bit less of that twist in there for the head study. A little bit, but suggesting little bits of anatomical structures. Not doing it with a straight line, by the way, doing it with a textured line. You can't use any smooth lines on something that is supposed to be textured. So even if you're representing anatomy, you've got to do it with a little bit of the suggestion of the contour textures. Okay. I'm going to go up a little higher with this A little higher with this shoulder. I think this has got to come down a little bit lower. These are kind of the ribs, although obviously you would not see. Okay, I'm going to come back on these guys a little bit. All right. Okay, let's see. How are we doing here? Check on some of my proportion lines. So I've got the edge of the mouth down here. Things are coming kind of flush. I think I need a little bit more width. A few hairs can suggest that over here. All right. I'm going to come a little wider over here. There we go. All right. So a lot of times, a lot of animals, canines, even tigers, around the gum, their lips, they have kind of a black, thicker line around the mouth. Almost, I guess they would be like lips. So I'm going to go a little bit of that. All right, there we go. A little sense of maybe like a cranial line that runs down here. And again, there's just sort of the skull, and then there's the mane behind it. So this will be kind of skull there. And again, this is ear. Some little bits of hairs in front here. Again, I'm using this kind of nice textured drawing tool, which is not only creating edges and forms and lines, but it's also creating a little sense of texture here. Okay. All right. I'm almost to the point now where I think I could like turn off the original and just work off of my own. I feel like I want this to be a little wider. Make this pectoralis a little wider. There we go. That feels better. Let's open that side up a little bit more. So we're seeing a little bit more of those ribs. All right. So we're getting a side of the ribs here. Take a side of ribs, please. Pectoralis. I'm going to bring these ribs out a little bit more. But this is really the edge of the ribs, which means I'm going to use a little bit of a heavier line because this will be sort of the beginning of the bicep. A little bit out here. So I'm going to back off on this line. Body's kind of turned there a little bit. External obliques. Okay. I'm going to go a little wider here. This is where it's now becoming the drawing of its own, right? So this is now the new drawing. I have kind of departed from the old one, and I'm now creating a bit of the new one. All right. Looking pretty good. Welcome in if you're just joining. We are working off of a larger drawing that we did earlier, which was this guy. And we did this a couple weeks back, and now we're working on more of a head study of this guy, which we started with sort of an enlargement and a flip of the original image, and now correcting for some anatomy, which we did with some basic left to right stuff, overall proportioning, foreshortening, and anatomy, and we've corrected for some of this, and now we are into the new. So I think I'm going to start using some marker now, or the equivalent, brush in Photoshop, and to help me bring out some of the lighting and the form. I have this underneath to guide me, but and I'll still probably kind of follow this lighting. I don't know. Let me see. If I'm doing this when the lighting is kind of just coming from above, sort of generally above, so coming back over to this one, I'll kind of still do above, I guess. So I'll turn this off for now, and I'm going to just pick maybe like a marker tool, and I think I would do, no shape dynamic, or maybe a little shape dynamics on it. But usually in the beginning, I actually don't like to start with shape dynamics, and not too much texture. I don't need all that stuff. So I am going to just go with, start with a new layer. That's the right mark. Now let's get the right value. So I'm going to come over here to some grayscale. And I'm going to go with sort of some pale. That's not bad. Might be a little light. So generally, if I'm thinking about this in markers, I like to do something that has a black value of probably closer to 80. So a little bit lighter, I guess. See how that looks. Okay, that's cool. So I'll make a little key for myself over here, which I like to do. And we'll start big. We're going layer multiply. We're going to go at 100%, by the way, which is kind of important. All right. So let's start with the big stuff. Where would the main shadows be? Figuring that this head is probably going to cast some shadow here. Sense of overlapping. And I'm thinking about dimensional form now, so I'm just blocking in shadows. anywhere that the light is probably not hitting. Thinking about the sides. And I'm not too worried about it being perfect, believe it or not. If you're just joining us, welcome. The stream is open. You are welcome to jump in the chat there if you have any questions or just want to chat it up with me. All right. I'm going to go in with something a little bit darker now. Ooh. And as I get with darker values, I am definitely going to work with a little bit more shape dynamics because I'm going to need to get those shapes a little more careful. Okay, this was a very quick pass of just general light dark areas, which sort of block in the masses, if you will. But now I'm getting into some specific shadows, so I'm going to switch to something as shape dynamics, giving my brush, a little bit more control as I get into those detailed areas with touch. What I'm going to do now is save, first of all. And then I'm going to drop in a lighter grayscale layer now. Because I have a lot of contrast, and this guy's going to have some basic tone that is other than just white. So 20% is sort of, the first pass of gray is what I'm thinking about, is kind of a 20%. And then the second pass of gray that I just did is going to be a little more like 50% to kind of really go in with the darks, right? Or at least the core shadows. But there's a lot of light in this. I mean, as we're kind of looking at this piece, there's a lot of light bouncing here. So not a whole lot is getting super dark at this point. So I am not going to get too dark too quick. But I do need a base tone over the top of the whole thing. So I'm going to throw in one more layer, which is just like basic tonality. I wouldn't call it the color. It is just base tone. So I'm going to go with something even lighter. Something maybe closer to like a 10%. And let's see what this looks like. See if this is too dark. Probably very realistic. Let's go a little bit lighter even. So this would be anything other than like something really hot. Come back with that last one. I'm going to leave the eye with just a little bit more light in it there. So you can think of this as like, these are like the hot spots now, right? Okay. Okay. All right. Not bad, not bad. Still using the shape dynamics to get me a little bit more detail in here. But these are still values. So even though I'm working in warm gray, this is not really necessarily the color that it needs to be. In fact, if I want this to be more colorful, I may actually need to think about this in terms of warms and cools. Right now we're working mostly monochromatic. Excuse me. Take a sip of tea here. Tea break. Oh yeah. Hey, thanks, Warp Fangs. Not just the name, I'm hoping. But thank you. I appreciate it very much. Okay, so let's think about this in terms of getting in a little bit more detail in shading the form. So I've kind of really blocked things down into kind of almost like a three value system at this point, which, by the way, while I'm at it, I want to make sure that documenting my my values as I'm working here. Okay, so that's really my three values that I'm working with at this point. I could go a little darker, but I'd have to decide, do I want to hold on to this line art or not? The line art is very graphic looking. If I go darker with my shadows, I'm going to lose some of that line. Just naturally, it's going to drop off into the really, really dark shadows, and I'm not sure I want to go that dark. Because in some ways having a graphic line gives it a little bit more style, I guess, maybe to it. So I'll take a look here and see what the next darker value might look like. Let's just see what happens here. If I had to go down one more, I'd probably go down maybe to like 70% gray here. And let's see what this looks like. Ooh, yeah. Now, the thing to remember is this is also multiply. So as you're working on these, as one layer multiplies over the top of the other, it actually gets darker quicker. So you have to kind of account for that a little bit. So let's see what this might look like in a few areas here. Make sure you're on multiply here. Ooh, see, yeah, that's pretty dark. Like that line is pretty much disappearing now. It's kind of dropping off substantially. So that might be a bit too dark. So let's do this. Let's come back up with that. And let's go a little bit lighter. Let's go up to 40. So it's a little bit darker. Let's see. Okay, but not substantially. So let's see what this is going to look like. So are we still seeing the black in there? Yeah, I mean, you're still getting some black in there, but this is the darkest area. Now, remember, this is the darkest dark. Darker than anything else you're going to do. So this would be almost like what you'd consider the core shadows. And again, definitely using shape dynamics on and controlling this a lot. Okay. This is your darkest darks. Just a few of those really darkest edges, which are going to, in this case, probably pop the silhouette a little bit. Got these kind of whiskers we were talking about. Now, because I'm working on the Cintiq, I've got a little bit of pressure sensitivity, actually a lot, which allows me to kind of lighten my lines a little bit. Okay, now we were talking about a little bit of this separation of the trapezius, which is this sort of muscles coming down the back of the shoulders here, and what is actually the mane in the background. So I have to divide a little bit more of a line between those two so that we are not losing track of what is all right. Okay, so I got my basic 3 value down here. And I think at this point I have to decide, do I want to make these blends smoother, or do I want to leave it kind of graphic and chunky? And right now we're looking at this as being more graphic and chunky and not getting into shading this thing too detailed. But I think I want to be thinking about this thing as being able to be rendered a bit more, which means the values are going to have to really come out a lot more. If I want it to feel realistic, the values are going to have to get more worked out and not so simplified. But if it's a concept and it's just an idea, then, and you're not getting into like portraiture, etc., then sometimes something quick, just a couple of base 3 values is enough to kind of see what you need, and that's it. So I think I'm going to add a few more layers for blending some of these values. Now, this is a technique that I use myself, and it's a good way to learn and control imagery through kind of 3-value paintings. It's not the only way, of course. Lots of people have their own techniques and methods that they prefer, but this allows me to kind of control it in stages. So I'm working this way, intentionally, and this is normally the way I work, but I think I'm going to add a few more layers just to get something in between. So if you look at it, I've got my 4 values up here, up at the top, and I'm thinking about some steps in between. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one, this is my 60. I'm going to drop in another layer in between, sort of in between here, in between my sort of the first one I did and the second one that I did. That's a little bit of a bigger jump, so I'm going to go with another half step in between those. So let's see. All right. So I'm going to drop a little tone in here. So yeah, it's sort of in between those two, right? So you can kind of see. So if you think about this tier, start out with my 4 values, so I'm going to go in with my next value here. And I'm going to make sure that it's on multiply, because I like to work in multiply, which treats it a little bit more like a watercolor, right? It's transparent, so these things are building on each other. So we can kind of back off here for a second, just to see where we are. Got our darks, our dark darks, right? And we've got our major shadow areas, sort of beginning of transition areas. And then we've got our core light area. I think I'm probably going to also end up doing one more step in between these top two as well. But I think for the moment I'll work on this smaller area here. How you guys doing out there? You doing all right? You drawing along with me? Welcome to the stream if it's your first time. Let me introduce myself. My name is Trey Gallaher. I am an illustrator, visual developer, educator. And I'm out here streaming usually on the weekends. You can check me out up above there at my website, Facebook, Art by Trey Gallaher, and then of course Instagram, Trey Gallaher. All the Trey Gallahers. And so if you're interested, check me out. We also have a Discord channel as part of this stream. So if you want to kind of continue the discussion, give me some feedback, share any news you have, or if you want feedback, you're welcome to join the Discord and keep the conversation going. So I welcome everybody's welcome here. So thanks for hanging out and welcome into the stream if you're new. Okay. So I'm working a little bit in between now, a little bit of these transitions. Any news out there? What's going on with you guys? I'm going to come back a little bit on these shadow layers over there. Okay. All right. So we have added this sort of additional in-between layers, kind of help flush out a little bit there. So now I'm going to add in one more layer here. And now we're going to break down a little bit of the gap between these upper two on the left. Okay. Which I'm going to make this... Okay, let's see how this looks. All right. So this is now going to be a little bit of the gap between this and those, right? A little bit of a stop in between those two. Okay, let's see how this goes here. You know, how many of these stages do you want to, go down in between? It's really up to you. So again, we're coming down a little. Thinking about those turning edges a little bit. Let's do a quick save. So again, we're working on curving those dimensions, right? Making those forms wrap a little bit. So dropping a little more of this tone right in there, you can see that that is really kind of helping curve that forehead a little bit more. Okay, so I think I need to go back in with this one just a little bit. I'm noticing there's a few areas down here which I think could... All right. I think we don't need any more. So I am going to group these into a folder. All right, and let's do a quick save. Now I'm going to add a layer over the top, which now I'm going to be thinking about a local color. So let's do this. What would be a good color for this guy? Probably something in the brownish department, right? So I'm going to fill everything with a color. And let's go something in the... Let's go with something like that. Let me see. I'm going to create a selection here. All right. So I've created a selection around my drawing, which is going to be sort of like doing a wash, but I want to keep it all in this same area. So I'm going to just quickly save this selection. Excuse me. Man, more tea. Take a break. All right. So we'll call this silhouette. And I'm going to fill this on this layer with a body color. We'll go with something a little bit warmer. And again, I could always adjust this later, but for now, I'm going to go warm. And the blending mode is going to be multiply. Okay. So this is sort of like doing a wash over everything, right? And that's a bit rich, so I might bring it up a little bit. All right, let's go with that for now. And then I'm going to take my values. Let's do a little bit of a layer adjustment here. Hook it. Colorize it. Let's turn off this for a second. And let's bring up the saturation. Let's go with something like that. Something cool, right? Something cool and kind of complementary to our local. All right. Now we can begin to play around with this a little bit. All right, there we go. Getting a little more of the balance that I want now. So, in terms of what we're seeing here, we are seeing a value pass that we worked on first, right? Excuse me, guys, I'm sorry. And a wash of color that sort of ends up being the color of our, we might think of this as like the flat, right? These are what we call flats. The color of the creature itself, and this might also be called local. A few other things we could actually call this, but for now we'll call it like the flats, which is the color. And then to kind of offset the temperature and to create a little more form out of those shadows, we're going to make those shadows be somewhat of a cooler color. Because without it, it's this, right? It's monochromatic. So by creating those shadows to be a little bit cooler, it actually looks more dimensional by using what we know about warm colors and cool colors, receding, etc. Okay. Obviously, I think what we have to kind of consider here is that the teeth are probably not going to be quite this color. So I'm going to go ahead and knock out a little bit of the teeth here in terms of the color. And this is, I'm knocking this out of the local. Now they aren't necessarily going to be this bright. Don't worry about that. I'm just knocking this as a shape. And they look bright right now because there's no color associated with them. And so suddenly they seem really bright, especially sort of in comparison to, you know, what we were applying as color to the whole thing. So again, this is not the color they're necessarily going to be. This is just taking some of that color that was there that I filled that I don't necessarily want there. Same thing with the eyes. I don't want these eyes to necessarily be okay. Other than that, I think we're good. All right, so let's do a little, maybe we need another color for the teeth because this is definitely some pretty sparkly whites going on here. Okay, I'm going to label a few layers here. Welcome in if you're just joining. Man, I have to apologize. I am coughing like crazy. I have I'm kind of dry actually, but I'm feeling like I have stuff moving down my throat. So I apologize for that. All right, here we go. So now, a little bit of color for these teeth. I'm picturing something off-white, but not, you know, Let's see how this is looking here. Okay. Going to multiply. I'm just going to knock these teeth back a little bit. Just don't want them to be quite that bright. Sort of a natural cream kind of ivory color. Same with the eyes. We need to reserve that bright white. Okay. Now, I think we may need to work with the tongue now, because I am assuming we're going to have a little bit of a tongue color in there. By the way, while we're at it, let's pop down some teeth color. And I got to do this for a second, so... Okay. All right. Let's go in with something that's a little more on the tongue side. Pick a classic reddish tongue. Let's start there, see what that gets us. Just taking care of a little layer management. Go with something kind of more on the red side. Now, we're going to go multiply. Sort of inside of the mouth. It's a little rich, a little intense. Back off just a little smidge. Okay. Okay. All right, let's see. Where do we go from here? So the quick and dirty version is we just start jumping into what would ultimately be some highlights. I think the question becomes now is, do we go in with more detail on the drawing or do we stay more graphic? And therein lies the time element. Because for now, we have covered a lot of ground in the time that we have started. And what are we in now? We're in 2 hours right now. So I think maybe what we'll do is we'll be thinking about breaking this up into maybe 2 sessions. Because I think from here, we're going to be talking about getting into the details. Of course, it's going to take some time. Maybe enhancement of the drawing, because again, this went down pretty quick as a sketch, and we're getting the general idea. But if we're going to get into more detail, we're going to have to really slow down, get some of those details, and begin to build the highlights. So, are we going to get that all in this session? My guess is probably not. So, what do we do? We could work a little bit more on the values to kind of break down those a little bit more. Put maybe another half step in there. Like so far, if you look up here, we have basically a 6-value quick shading system. But we need some details, and those details are going to come out of the line work. They're going to come out of the highlights. But we're not really there for the highlights yet. So I think at this point, I'm going to put a bit more detail in the drawing. Let's see how that looks. And then if we need a little bit more values, like one more step of values, then maybe we could do that as well. But I don't really want to get into a lot of the highlights, I think, this pass. So let's think graphically. What will make it stronger? A bit more detail in certain areas of the drawing, and cleaning up the image, we'll say a little bit. So one of the things I'm not too happy with at this point is I kind of have this facial hair piece coming down, but I'm kind of losing it in the value of the rib cage, which I started to kind of draw, or the abdominal muscles, which I'm kind of loosely blocking in here, but I'm losing the shape of the sort of goatee. So I think either I have to fill in more area of the torso here or lose it. But I want to accentuate the shape of the goatee a little bit more, and right now it's getting kind of lost. So let's start there. How you guys doing? We're doing okay? Looks like we're doing good on stream health. Everybody good? All right. So we'll do a little cleanup, a little more addition to the drawing for this time, and then we'll revisit it next time where we'll really get into some more of the details and the highlights and more of the finessing of it. This is still kind of set up first and second stage, we'll say. All right, back over to values. So let's take a look here. Okay, so it's down here in the fur. So let's clean this up a bit. So we're cleaning up the silhouette a little bit here. All right. So I'm working on the silhouette. Okay. So here we go. Let's walk our way through. Drawing. I'm going to come up a little bit on those darks there. Okay. Darker. I think I have a little cleanup on these as well. This got a little heavy, I think. Okay, so I'm going to turn off a couple of values before this. Okay, so I'm doing a little more careful work here now. This is my darkest value, which I think I was a little too loose with it in a few areas here. These are highlight areas that would not have that much shadow on it. I think I was a little hasty. Little hasty. Okay, looks good. Heavier lines on this side for sure. A little more shadows on this side, light coming from above. Okay, now I'm working a little bit on these. This is going to get more light over here. Okay, that feels a little better. Let's put a little more careful into these, a few of these shadows here. Yeah, that's a little better. Okay. So you can see, because I broke my layers down and I'm controlling my values by layer, I can kind of see which value is hitting maybe too hard. Do I need to lighten that one a little bit? And I do feel that in a few places it's got a little too chunky. Some places it's working great and really rounding things out. Like I like the way it's working down here in the lower, right pectoralis down there is working good. But there's some areas around the head where it's got maybe a little too heavy over here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to back off a little bit on these ones. Just a little. Just come back a little bit there. Just doing little bits of cleanup. All right. We're looking pretty good. Almost there. Okay. Just perfecting this silhouette a little bit. There's a few little areas where I kind of overshot. And you might think, well, it's just a sketch, does it matter? But I think at this stage, overshooting a few places can alter the silhouette, right? And the silhouette's going to be one of the very, very strong elements of this thing. The silhouette is going to really, people underestimate the power of something so simple as a flat two-dimensional shape and how we read that. But the silhouette is really one of the first initial reads that our brain makes on the thing and remembers it. So it's important to make sure that it's just right. It's just right. All right. Okay, so there's a few edges which I want to soften now. And I'm looking at the 20% range, 10% range. Do a quick save here. So I'm going to soften a little bit of this, just in a few places. So if you're keeping score, I'm on the 10% or 90% of white, but what I think of as 10% gray. And you can see where a few of these edges are really kind of hard and chunky, right? Because of the tool that I was using. And I'm fine with that on a lot of it, but there's a few places where I think a slightly more smoother transition in that shadow is going to do a better job. So this is just a finessing thing at this point. I'm going to drop in here very softly, like 30%. Now I'm actually adjusting the brush itself, not the layer. So I'm going to come in here and just softly kind of just take the edge off of a few of those shapes. Just to help those edges turn a little bit. And I'm going to do it also on my 20% here. A little bit on the 5. So I'm just softening it a little bit. You can see that little edge there, just it was hard before, but then, erase it with like 30% is all I'm doing. Just softening a little bit of that edge. You could almost go back in and paint this as another value layer, but I don't really care to spend that much time doing it everywhere. So I'm just doing it in a few key spots. like this one right here. I just need to soften that just a little bit. I don't always do it this way, but this is sort of the quick little edit without going too deep. A little bit up here in these ears where the light's going to hit. Some of this I'll go back in with an actual highlight tool. And we'll do that next time when we're working on highlights. This is just to help block in these middle values a little more carefully. All right. I think for this time, we are in a good place. And I think we're going to put a pin in it. As they say, we got a good strong silhouette. We've come a long way. I'm going to close up these values over here. Let's take a look. We had our drawing, right? Our colors, our flats. And we'll drop back to this being our drawing. That we started last week, or a couple weeks ago, with this sketch and markers and graphite, and kind of got this initial idea concept going. We brought that head over and we flipped our head, right? And we ended up correcting for this head a little bit, getting ourselves a little bit of anatomical correcting and center lining and making sure that things are foreshortened that need to be foreshortened. We corrected the shoulder. You can see here how we moved the shoulder up considerably from the previous version where it was turned a lot more. And we made those corrections, which allowed us to block in our drawing now over the top of those corrections. So we turn those corrections off and we are back to the drawing, which that in and of itself is doing a wonderful job, much softer using the markers. But now we're working in a digital technique, so we are not using the drawing anymore. We're going to go with our drawing here, and we have begun to add our own values, right? Which we at first worked in with our markers, okay? Building up our values in a 4, 5, 6 value system, basically, right? and then we turned on a local color, which gives us the actual color of the beastie himself, at least this version of the beastie. We could easily be changed, but for now, this is the value that we chose and the color that we chose, which then we proceeded to take our shadow values here and give them a color and actually apply a little bit of a hue adjustment and shift them over to a cooler color, which in combination now with that flat local color is really working together to get this nice thing. Now we also threw in a little bit of teeth to knock those back and some tongue or inside of the mouth, which again probably will be darker, but that'll be something that'll have to be done in the value layers. I suppose I could do that really quick here. Let's drop over to probably pretty dark. I'm gonna say, well, we could start with 50%, which currently we're at 80. Let's sample that color real quick. And let's drop this back. It's the inside of the mouth, right? So it's going to be darker. Now, again, the drawing needs some perfection. It needs some more detailing, maybe some referencing. So maybe next time I could actually show up with some references, and I could fine tune some of this anatomy around the mouth, around the muzzle. Right now I'm going to sample this darkest gray value and darken some more of the inside of the mouth here, just to give a little more dimension to it. There we go. All right. So our values are all set. Local set. And we're in a good place today. I thank you for joining me. If this was the morning or the daytime, or if you were flying with us live, then you were in West Coast San Francisco time, where it is pretty late. We're after midnight now, and it is time to crash out. And next time, we will start to add more details. We'll start painting in some highlights. Maybe we'll work with the background. Maybe we won't. Honestly, I just wanted to kind of include this as a little head study, so I don't think I'll be doing too much with the background. If I did anything, it would maybe just be a little bit of basic wash of color or something behind it, or a graphic of some sort to help add to the dimension of it. But when we think about this as a piece of art, this is really just something that is a head study that I'd probably incorporate, again, together with something like this, but done, kind of bring them together. So I wouldn't want to incorporate a huge background. But for now, this is where we're at.